Hello everyone, before we begin tonight's haunting tale, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the fear. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time the unknown feels closest to you. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let the whispers of the unknown guide you through the eerie corridors of our story. Ready to face the darkness? The town of Greyston was the kind of place that seemed to belong to a bygone era. Its cobblestone streets and gabled rooftops gave it a quaint charm, but beneath its picturesque facade lay whispers of darker tales. At the edge of the town, where the streetlights gave way to shadows and the trees loomed like silent sentinels, there was a lane unlike any other. Ashwood Lane, with its cracked asphalt and overgrown hedges, was avoided by locals and tourists alike. No one knew for certain why it felt so unwelcoming, but everyone had their theories. Some said it was the tragic history tied to the lane, the kind of story that lingered in the air long after its details were forgotten. Others spoke of the whispers, barely audible but undeniably present, that seemed to follow anyone who dared to walk its length at night. And then there were those who claimed to have seen the shadows, dark, fleeting figures that moved just beyond the edge of sight. But these tales were just stories, weren't they? That was the question Lydia Bennett had come to answer. Lydia was not one to shy away from mystery. A journalist with a penchant for the unusual, she had built her career on uncovering the truth behind the unexplainable. Ghost towns, haunted mansions, cryptic local legends, she had explored them all, armed with little more than a notepad and her unyielding skepticism. But something about Ashwood Lane intrigued her in a way few stories ever did. Perhaps it was the consistency of the accounts, the way even the most hardened skeptics in Greyston seemed reluctant to speak of it. Or maybe it was the challenge. After all, she'd never met a mystery she couldn't unravel. The journey to Greyston had been uneventful, a winding drive through the rolling countryside that gradually gave way to dense woodlands. Lydia arrived in the early afternoon, the sun casting a golden hue over the town. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so, with only a few pedestrians milling about the main square. She checked into a modest inn, the kind with creaky floors and floral wallpaper, and spent the first hour unpacking her equipment. A digital recorder, a camera, and her trusty leather-bound notebook were laid out meticulously on the desk. She was ready. Her first stop was the town library, a brick building that smelled of aged paper and varnished wood. The librarian, a wiry man named Edgar, greeted her with a cautious smile. When she mentioned Ashwood Lane, his expression stiffened. "You're not planning to go there, are you?" he asked, his voice low. "That's the idea," Lydia replied, matching his gaze. "I'm here to investigate the stories. Get to the truth." Edgar sighed, glancing around as if to ensure no one else was listening. "The truth about Ashwood Lane is that it's better left alone. You won't find anything there worth the risk." "That's for me to decide," she said firmly. "Do you have any records or accounts I can look at?" Reluctantly, Edgar led her to a back corner of the library where a collection of old newspapers and local histories were stored. Lydia spent the next few hours combing through them, piecing together fragments of Ashwood Lane's past. There were mentions of a fire that had claimed a family's home in the 1920s, whispers of a hermit who had lived at the lane's end and vanished without a trace, and a chilling account from a police officer who had reported hearing voices while patrolling the area at night. What struck Lydia most was the consistency. Though the details varied, the theme remained the same. Ashwood Lane was a place where the ordinary rules of the world didn't seem to apply. By the time Lydia left the library, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. She made her way to the lane, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and unease. The entrance was marked by a weathered signpost, its paint peeling and its lettering barely legible. Beyond it, the lane stretched out like a forgotten path, its surface cracked and overgrown with weeds. As she stepped onto the lane, the air seemed to change. It was colder here, heavier, as though the very atmosphere was pressing down on her. She pulled her coat tighter around her and began to walk, her footsteps echoing faintly in the stillness. The whispers began almost immediately. At first, they were so faint she thought she might be imagining them. A soft, indecipherable murmur that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She paused, turning her head to listen, but the sound stopped. Shaking off her unease, she continued forward, her camera at the ready. The lane was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Lydia's flashlight cut through the growing darkness, illuminating twisted branches and gnarled roots that seemed to encroach on the path. She reached a point where the lane curved sharply, and for a moment, she thought she saw movement in the corner of her eye. A shadow, quick and fleeting, disappearing into the trees. "Hello," she called out, her voice steady despite the chill running down her spine. There was no response, only the return of the whispers, louder this time and more distinct. She could almost make out words, though their meaning eluded her. Lydia took a deep breath, steeling herself. "If anyone's there, show yourself," she said. Again, there was no reply, but the whispers grew softer, retreating into the background. Underscore 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 underscore. Back at the inn, Lydia reviewed the photos and recordings she had taken. The images showed nothing out of the ordinary, but the audio was another matter. Playing back the recordings, she heard the whispers clearly, a chorus of voices overlapping in a way that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. She replayed the clip several times, trying to discern the words, but they remained just out of reach. The next morning, Lydia visited a small general store run by an elderly woman named Mrs. Harper. Over tea, Lydia broached the subject of Ashwood Lane. Mrs. Harper's face darkened, and she shook her head. "That place is cursed," she said. "Always has been. My mother used to tell me stories about the Hales, the family that lived there before the fire. She said they were a strange bunch, always keeping to themselves. After they died, people started hearing things, seeing things. It's like their spirits never left." "Do you believe that?" Lydia asked. Mrs. Harper hesitated before answering. "I don't know what to believe, but I've heard the whispers myself, late at night when the wind is still. It's like they're calling out, looking for something." Lydia's curiosity deepened. She thanked Mrs. Harper and left the store, her mind racing with questions. Who were the Hales, and what had happened to them? Were the whispers truly the voices of restless spirits, or was there another explanation? As she walked back toward the lane, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows seemed to shift and dance in the corner of her vision, and the whispers, even in the daylight, were never far away. Whatever lay at the heart of Ashwood Lane, Lydia was determined to find it. And as she crossed the threshold once more, she knew there was no turning back. The second time Lydia ventured onto Ashwood Lane, the sense of foreboding was more pronounced. It wasn't just the cold air or the oppressive silence, it was the feeling that the lane was aware of her. She paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath before stepping forward. Her camera and recorder were ready, but this time she carried something else, a talisman Mrs. Harper had given her earlier that day. For protection, the old woman had said, pressing the small, intricately carved piece of wood into Lydia's hand. "I've seen too many people walk that lane and never return. The whispers take them. Don't let them take you." Lydia had thanked her, though she wasn't sure she believed in the talisman's supposed power. Still, it rested in her pocket now, its weight strangely comforting as she began her walk. The lane was different this time. The overgrown hedges seemed to close in on her, and the trees arched overhead like skeletal hands grasping for the sky. The whispers began sooner, faint and indistinct, but unmistakable. She paused to adjust her recorder, ensuring it was capturing every sound. As she moved forward, the whispers grew louder, almost as if they were following her. "Why?" a voice seemed to say, so clear that Lydia froze in place. "Who's there?" she called out, turning in a circle to scan the shadows. Her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but twisted branches and empty air. The whispers continued, now overlapping in a cacophony of sounds that seemed to come from every direction. She pressed on, her steps quicker now. The lane curved ahead, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw the outline of a figure standing at the bend. It was tall and indistinct, more shadow than substance, and it vanished the moment her flashlight touched it. Her heart pounded as she reached the curve, but there was no one there. The air was colder now, her breath visible in the faint beam of her light. She stopped to take a photo, the camera's flash briefly illuminating the path ahead. When she looked at the screen, the image seemed normal at first. But as she zoomed in, her blood ran cold. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible, was a figure. Its features were obscured, but its eyes, dark and piercing, stared directly at the camera. Lydia's hand trembled as she turned off the camera. The lane felt alive around her, the whispers pressing closer, their tones shifting from mournful to accusatory. She gripped the talisman in her pocket, its surface smooth and warm against her palm. "I'm not afraid of you," she said aloud, her voice steadier than she felt. The whispers fell silent. For a moment, the lane was deathly still, the only sound her own breathing. Then, the shadows moved. It started subtly, the darkness shifting in the corners of her vision. But as she watched, the shadows coalesced, forming shapes that flickered and danced like smoke in the wind. They moved toward her, slow and deliberate, their forms growing more defined with each step she took. Lydia's instinct was to run, but she forced herself to stand her ground, raising her camera to capture the scene. The flash illuminated the shadows, and for an instant, she saw faces within them. They were twisted and anguished, their mouths open in silent screams. The sight was so shocking that she stumbled backward, nearly dropping the camera. When she steadied herself and looked again, the shadows had dispersed, melting back into the darkness. By the time Lydia returned to the inn, she was shaken but determined. She spent the night reviewing her footage and recordings. The photos were disturbing, each one showing faint outlines of figures where there should have been none. The audio was even more chilling. The whispers were louder than before, and some of the words were now clear. "Help us. It burns. Why did you leave?" Lydia played the recordings over and over, trying to make sense of the voices. They sounded human, desperate and pained, but there was something unnatural about them. She thought of the Hales, the family who had perished in the fire decades ago. Were these their voices? And if so, what did they want? The questions kept her awake long into the night, her mind racing with possibilities. She thought of Mrs. Harper's warning and the stories Edgar had shared at the library. There was something binding these whispers to Ashwood Lane, something that went beyond the tragic fire. Lydia was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The next day, she returned to the library, hoping to find more information about the Hales. Edgar greeted her with a wary look but didn't protest when she requested access to the archives again. This time, she focused on personal accounts and letters, hoping to find something more revealing than the sparse newspaper reports. She struck gold in the form of a letter written by Margaret Hale, the matriarch of the family, shortly before the fire. The letter was addressed to a friend in another town, and its tone was frantic. "Dearest Eleanor, there is something wrong with this place. The shadows move at night, and I hear voices in the dark. They call to me, whispering things I cannot understand. Thomas says it's just my imagination, but I know better. Something is here, Eleanor. Something that does not belong. The children have begun to see it too. Little Emily woke screaming last night, saying there was a man in her room. A man made of smoke. I do not know what to do. Please, if you can, come quickly. I fear for our safety. Yours in desperation, Margaret. Underscore 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 underscore. The letter sent a shiver down Lydia's spine. It confirmed her suspicions that the Hales had experienced the same phenomena that now plagued Ashwood Lane. But what had caused it? And why did the whispers persist even now? She shared her findings with Mrs. Harper that evening, hoping the older woman might have some insight. Mrs. Harper's face grew pale as she read the letter. "I've heard stories about Margaret," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some say she tried to summon something. A spirit, maybe, to protect her family. But if that's true, she must have called something else instead. Something dark. Lydia's curiosity deepened. If Margaret Hale had indeed summoned something, could it still be lingering on Ashwood Lane? And if so, was there a way to send it back? As the sun set, Lydia found herself standing at the entrance to Ashwood Lane once more. The talisman was in her pocket, the recorder in her hand, and Margaret Hale's letter tucked safely in her jacket. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew she couldn't stop now. The lane stretched out before her, dark and foreboding. The whispers began almost immediately, louder and more urgent than ever. Lydia stepped forward, her resolve unshaken. "I'm here," she said aloud. "Show me what you want me to see." And as the shadows began to stir, she felt a strange sense of calm. The mystery of Ashwood Lane was about to reveal itself, and Lydia was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Lydia's footsteps echoed softly as she moved deeper into the lane. The darkness seemed thicker here, clinging to her like a tangible force. The whispers swirled around her, growing louder with every step. They were more distinct now, fragments of words forming phrases that sent chills down her spine. "Help us." "Why?" "It's coming." She paused to adjust her camera, her hands trembling as she ensured it was capturing the environment. The air was cold, almost unnaturally so, and the faint smell of smoke lingered, though there was no fire in sight. Her flashlight's beam illuminated the cracked asphalt and gnarled roots that seemed to writhe underfoot. As she moved forward, her mind raced with questions. Who were these voices? And what were they trying to warn her about? Halfway down the lane, she spotted something unusual, a faded wooden signpost leaning precariously against a tree. The lettering was almost illegible, worn away by time and the elements, but she could just make out the words. Hale Estate. A shiver ran down her spine. This was it, the remains of the property where the Hale family had lived and died. She snapped a photo before moving closer, her heart pounding in anticipation. The whispers grew more insistent, their tones shifting from mournful to almost pleading. Lydia could feel their presence pressing against her, as if the shadows themselves were alive. When she reached the clearing, she saw the remnants of a stone foundation, overgrown with moss and weeds. It was all that remained of the Hale house, the structure long since consumed by fire and time. The air here was different, heavier, and she felt an almost magnetic pull toward the center of the ruins. There, partially buried beneath a tangle of roots, was a scorched wooden chest. Lydia knelt beside the chest, brushing away the dirt and debris. The wood was charred, but the metal hinges were intact. She hesitated for a moment, the whispers swirling around her, before prying it open. Inside was a collection of items, a child's doll, a stack of letters, and a small, ornate box. The doll's porcelain face was cracked, its eyes staring blankly ahead, and the letters were brittle with age. But it was the box that caught her attention. The box was intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize, and it radiated a faint warmth as she touched it. Inside was a locket, its surface etched with the initials MH. She opened it to find a faded photograph of a woman and 2 children. Lydia's breath caught. This had to be Margaret Hale and her children. The photo was hauntingly intimate, their expressions solemn as they stared directly into the camera. She carefully packed the items back into the chest, her mind racing. This discovery felt like a key, a piece of the puzzle that might explain the whispers and the shadows. But what was the connection between the Hale family and the strange phenomena plaguing Ashwood Lane? As Lydia made her way back toward the entrance of the lane, the atmosphere shifted. The whispers grew louder, more agitated, and the shadows seemed to close in around her. She quickened her pace, her flashlight sweeping across the path in frantic arcs. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, and she could feel eyes on her, though she saw no one. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. Panic gripped her as she fumbled to retrieve her spare batteries, the whispers now deafening. "Stay. Don't leave. Help us." Her hands shook as she replaced the batteries, her breathing ragged. When the flashlight clicked back on, she screamed. Standing mere feet away was a shadowy figure, its form indistinct but undeniably human. Its eyes glowed faintly, and it reached out a hand toward her. Instinct took over, and Lydia bolted, her feet pounding against the uneven ground. The whispers followed her, growing louder and more frantic. She didn't stop until she reached the entrance of the lane, collapsing onto the grass and gasping for air. When she finally dared to look back, the lane was silent once more, the shadows retreating into the trees. Back at the inn, Lydia reviewed her footage with shaking hands. The video was grainy and distorted, but it clearly showed the shadowy figure standing on the path. Its movements were unnatural, jerky and disjointed, and its glowing eyes were unmistakable. The audio was even more disturbing. The whispers were clearer than ever, and one phrase stood out among the rest. "It burns. It burns. It burns." Lydia couldn't shake the image of the figure from her mind. Was it a spirit? A residual echo of the Hale family's tragic end? Or was it something else entirely, something darker? Determined to find answers, Lydia returned to the library the next day. Edgar greeted her with a wary glance, his concern evident. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Something like that," Lydia replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "I need to know more about the Hale family. Specifically, Margaret Hale. Was there anything unusual about her? Any rumors?" Edgar hesitated, then motioned for her to follow him to a restricted section of the archives. He pulled out a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. "This is the town's oral history," he explained. "There's a section on the Hales, but it's not pleasant reading." Lydia flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the faded text. One account caught her attention. Margaret Hale was known to dabble in the occult, though no one dared speak of it openly. Some claimed she sought to protect her family from a curse, while others believed she invited something into their home that should never have been summoned. On the night of the fire, witnesses reported hearing screams that did not sound human, and shadows moved through the flames as though alive. The passage sent a chill down Lydia's spine. If Margaret had indeed summoned something, was it still lingering on Ashwood Lane? And if so, could it be the cause of the whispers and the shadows? That evening, Lydia sat in her room, the ornate box and its contents spread out on the desk before her. She examined the symbols carved into the box, their meaning elusive. She snapped photos of them, intending to research their origins later, and carefully opened the locket again. The photograph inside seemed different now, the faces of Margaret and her children almost blurred, as though they were fading. The whispers began again, faint but persistent. Lydia froze, her eyes darting to the window. The lane was several blocks away, yet she could hear the voices as clearly as if they were in the room with her. "Why? It's coming. Help us." The shadows in the room seemed to shift, and Lydia felt a chill run down her spine. She clutched the talisman Mrs. Harper had given her, its surface warm against her palm. Whatever was happening, it was escalating. The lane, and whatever resided there, wasn't going to let her leave without answers. The next morning, Lydia resolved to return to the lane one last time. She packed her camera, recorder, and the talisman, determined to confront whatever was waiting for her. As she stepped onto the path, the whispers began immediately, louder and more urgent than ever before. The shadows moved at the edges of her vision, and the air was thick with anticipation. Lydia's heart pounded as she pressed forward, the lane seeming to stretch endlessly before her. She could feel the presence of something watching her, waiting for her to reach the heart of the mystery. And as she rounded the final bend, she knew she was no longer alone. Lydia's resolve strengthened as she stepped onto the eerie path of Ashwood Lane once more. The talisman in her pocket felt heavier, as though it absorbed the oppressive energy surrounding her. The whispers returned instantly, weaving through the trees like invisible serpents. This time, they were more distinct, phrases overlapping in a macabre harmony. "Turn back. It's watching. Why do you seek?" Despite the chill racing through her, Lydia pushed forward. Her flashlight's beam danced over gnarled roots and jagged stones, and her recorder was already capturing the spectral cacophony. Tonight felt different, more alive, more dangerous. As the lane curved deeper into the forest, she spotted the faint outline of the Hale Estate's foundation. The scorched remnants of the house seemed darker in the moonlight, shadows pooling unnaturally around the ruins. Lydia crouched near the charred wooden chest she had uncovered earlier, brushing away fresh layers of debris as though the lane itself had tried to reclaim it. The ornate box was still there, its carvings seeming to pulse faintly in the darkness. Lydia hesitated before opening it again. The symbols etched into the wood seemed to twist and shift under her gaze. Her hands trembled as she retrieved the locket, its once vivid photograph now almost completely blurred. The sight unsettled her, as if the lane's dark energy was erasing the Hale's existence piece by piece. A sudden gust of wind sent leaves scattering across the ruins, and with it came a low, guttural sound. Lydia's breath hitched as she scanned the shadows, her flashlight's beam cutting through the night. Nothing moved, yet the air buzzed with an unspoken tension. She gripped the talisman in her pocket, its warmth a fragile reassurance. Returning to the inn that night, Lydia's mind raced. She spread her findings across the desk: the locket, the photographs, Margaret Hale's frantic letter, and her recorder. Playing back the latest audio chilled her to the bone. Among the whispers, a new voice emerged, deeper, angrier. "You shouldn't be here." The voice sent shivers down her spine. It was distinct from the others, carrying a weight of authority that seemed to command the whispers around it. Lydia's fingers hovered over the stop button, her mind wrestling with fear and curiosity. Could this be the presence Mrs. Harper had warned her about? Or was it something else entirely, something tied to Margaret Hale's alleged summoning? The next day, Lydia returned to the library, her determination unshaken. Edgar greeted her with a wary glance, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Back so soon?" he asked, his tone tinged with concern. "I need more information," Lydia replied, placing Margaret Hale's letter on the counter. "You said the town's oral history might have more. I need to know what Margaret was trying to summon." Edgar sighed, but he didn't protest. He led her to a restricted section of the archives and pulled out an aged leather-bound book. The cover was embossed with faded gold lettering that read, "Legends and Lore of Greyston." "This is the only account that mentions Margaret's rituals in detail," he said. "But I warn you, it's unsettling." Lydia's eyes scanned the fragile pages, her heart pounding as she uncovered the story. Margaret Hale had turned to forbidden practices in desperation. According to the accounts, she had sought the guidance of an outcast mystic, hoping to protect her family from an unnamed force that had begun tormenting them. The rituals involved blood, fire, and symbols that mirrored the ones carved into the ornate box. One passage stood out. Margaret's final ritual was meant to bind the shadows plaguing her family. Witnesses reported seeing flames that danced unnaturally and hearing voices that didn't belong to this world. When the fire consumed the Hale house, the shadows remained, growing stronger with each passing year. Lydia's pulse quickened. Margaret hadn't summoned the shadows, she had tried to contain them. But something had gone terribly wrong. That evening, Lydia visited Mrs. Harper once more. The elderly woman's eyes widened when Lydia showed her the ornate box and described the symbols. "Those markings," Mrs. Harper whispered, her hands trembling. "They're wards. Protective symbols." Margaret wasn't calling something to her, she was keeping it away. "Keeping what away?" Lydia pressed, her voice urgent. Mrs. Harper's gaze grew distant, her expression haunted. "I don't know what it is, but it's old. Older than this town, older than any of us. The shadows aren't just spirits, they're something darker. Something hungry." The words sent a chill through Lydia. The shadows weren't merely the echoes of a family's tragedy, they were a force that had existed long before the Hales. And they were bound to Ashwood Lane. As the moon rose high, Lydia prepared for her next journey to the lane. She packed her bag carefully, her camera, recorder, flashlight, and the talisman. This time, she added the ornate box, its symbols potentially her only protection. The lane welcomed her with a cold, unnatural stillness. The air was heavy, the whispers already swirling around her like a storm. Her footsteps echoed as she moved deeper, the shadows shifting at the edges of her vision. Midway down the path, she stopped. The whispers had grown clearer, their tones more frantic. "Why did you come? It's too late. Run." Lydia's flashlight illuminated the foundation of the Hale house, now appearing more defined than before. It was as though the lane itself wanted her to see it. She approached cautiously, her breath visible in the freezing air. The charred chest was still there, but something had changed. The symbols on the ornate box glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. Lydia's pulse raced as she opened it once more. The locket inside seemed warmer, almost alive. Her fingers brushed against its surface, and a sudden wave of images flooded her mind. Flames. Screams. Shadows twisting and writhing as though alive. Lydia stumbled back, her vision blurring as the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. She clutched the talisman, its warmth anchoring her as the lane seemed to tilt and sway around her. When her vision cleared, she saw them. The shadows had taken form. They were human-like but distorted, their features twisted in anguish. One stepped closer, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. "Help us," it whispered, its voice laced with desperation. "Free us." Lydia's voice trembled. "What are you?" The shadow hesitated before responding, its form flickering. Trapped. Bound. Burning. The realization struck Lydia like a thunderclap. These weren't malevolent spirits, they were the remnants of something far older, imprisoned by Margaret Hale's failed ritual. And the lane itself was their cage. Underscore 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 underscore. As Lydia made her way back to the inn, the weight of her discovery pressed heavily on her. The shadows weren't her enemies, they were victims. But freeing them could unleash something far worse. The ornate box, the talisman, Margaret Hale's letter, they were all pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Sitting at her desk, she reviewed the recordings and photographs. The shadows appeared more defined than ever, their anguished faces etched into her memory. The whispers on the audio were clearer now, fragments of their suffering bleeding through. "It burns. Please. Release us." Lydia knew she was running out of time. The lane's energy was growing stronger, its whispers more insistent. Whatever Margaret Hale had bound there was stirring, and Lydia was the only one who could uncover the truth. The next morning, Lydia visited Edgar one final time. She placed the ornate box on the counter, her voice steady but urgent. "I need to know how to undo this," she said. "How do I free them?" Edgar's eyes widened as he examined the box. "You don't," he said firmly. "If Margaret failed, what makes you think you'll succeed? Whatever she tried to contain, it's stronger now. More dangerous." "But they're suffering," Lydia insisted. "I can't just leave them like this." Edgar hesitated, then opened a thick tome. "There's a passage here about breaking bindings," he said, his voice low. "But it's risky. If you fail, you'll release whatever's trapped in there." Lydia's heart pounded as she read the passage. The ritual required fire, the symbols from the ornate box, and blood. Her blood. She swallowed hard, her resolve hardening. "Tell me what I need to do." Edgar's gaze softened, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. "You're braver than most," he said. "But bravery won't protect you from what's to come." As Lydia prepared for her final confrontation with the lane, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows were waiting for her, their whispers growing louder, their desperation palpable. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she knew she was about to face the darkness head-on and discover whether she had the strength to unravel its secrets or succumb to its depths. Lydia's final preparations for her third journey into Ashwood Lane were meticulous. Each step felt like a ritual in itself, as though her survival depended on it. Her camera and recorder were freshly charged, her flashlight packed with extra batteries, and the talisman securely fastened around her neck. The ornate box, the enigmatic centerpiece of this growing mystery, rested heavily in her bag. This time, she wasn't just seeking answers. She was seeking resolution. The lane welcomed her with an unnatural quiet. Even the whispers, which usually began the moment she stepped onto its cracked asphalt, were subdued, like the breath held before a scream. Lydia felt a sense of unease settle over her. It was as though the lane was waiting, watching her every move. The foundation of the Hale estate emerged from the shadows, its skeletal remnants more imposing in the pale moonlight. Lydia stood at the edge of the ruins, her breath visible in the chill night air. She could feel the lane's energy vibrating around her, a tangible force pressing against her skin. From her bag, she retrieved the ornate box. The symbols etched into its surface glowed faintly, reacting to the lane's oppressive aura. She opened it, her fingers brushing against the locket. A faint warmth spread through her hand, and once again, she was assaulted by visions. Flashes of fire and smoke. The distorted faces of the shadows. A voice, low and commanding, whispering words she couldn't understand. Lydia staggered back, gasping for air as the visions subsided. The lane seemed to close in around her, the trees arching like skeletal hands. The whispers returned, louder and more urgent. "Save us. It burns. Don't trust it." Her flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the ruins. She turned sharply, the sensation of being watched growing stronger. And then she saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form indistinct but undeniably human. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its voice was a guttural whisper. "You should not have come." Lydia froze, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she stood her ground, clutching the talisman around her neck. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The figure hesitated, its form flickering like a flame. "A guardian," it said at last. "Bound to this place. Bound to them. To the shadows?" Lydia asked, her mind racing. "What are they?" The figure's glow dimmed, and its voice became softer. "They are prisoners. Trapped by Margaret's hand. But their suffering feeds the darkness. The more they cry out, the stronger it becomes." Lydia's pulse quickened. "How do I free them? How do I stop this?" The figure raised a shadowy hand, pointing toward the ornate box. "The key lies within. But the cost will be great. Underscore 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 underscore. The figure dissolved into the darkness, leaving Lydia alone with the whispers and her pounding heart. She turned back to the ruins, her mind replaying its cryptic words. The ornate box felt heavier in her hands as she opened it once more, her eyes scanning the symbols for meaning. In the center of the box, beneath the locket, was a hidden compartment. Lydia pried it open, revealing a small, blackened stone etched with the same symbols that adorned the box's exterior. The whispers grew louder as she held it, their tones shifting from pleading to angry. "Put it back. Don't touch it. You don't understand." Ignoring the voices, Lydia placed the stone on the ground and began to arrange the items she had brought. The ritual described in Edgar's tome played in her mind like a mantra: fire, symbols, blood. Each element felt like a step closer to the unknown. The flames roared to life, casting flickering shadows across the ruins. Lydia stood at the center, her heart pounding as she traced the symbols from the ornate box onto the ground. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The blackened stone pulsed with a faint light, reacting to the symbols and the fire. Lydia hesitated, the final step weighing heavily on her. She pressed the edge of a knife against her palm, the sharp sting of pain grounding her as blood pooled onto the stone. The reaction was immediate. The flames surged higher, and the shadows around her coalesced into distinct forms. The faces of the shadows twisted in anguish, their mouths opening in silent screams. Lydia stumbled back, clutching the talisman as the ground beneath her trembled. A voice, deeper and more powerful than the others, echoed through the lane. "You cannot undo what has been done." Lydia's eyes darted around the ruins, searching for the source. The shadows seemed to shift and merge, forming a towering figure that loomed over her. Its eyes burned like embers, and its presence was suffocating. "Who are you?" Lydia shouted, her voice barely audible over the roaring fire. The figure leaned closer, its form rippling like smoke. "I am the binding and the bound. The curse and the cursed. What do you want?" The figure's laughter was a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down her spine. "To be free. But freedom comes with a price. underscore 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 underscore. Lydia's mind raced as the figure's words sank in. The shadows weren't just victims, they were a part of something far greater, a darkness that Margaret Hale had only partially contained. If she freed them, the lane's true nature would be unleashed. The talisman grew warm against her chest, its energy grounding her as she made her decision. She stepped closer to the stone, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "I will set you free," she said, her words cutting through the whispers. "But on my terms." The shadows hesitated, their forms flickering as though caught between worlds. The towering figure loomed closer, its eyes narrowing. "Your terms mean nothing," it growled. "You are mortal. You are nothing." Lydia clenched her fists, her determination unshaken. "Then why are you afraid?" The figure roared, its form disintegrating into a whirlwind of shadows that spiraled around her. Lydia held her ground, her hand gripping the talisman as she chanted the incantation Edgar had given her. The fire flared brighter, consuming the symbols and the stone. The shadows screamed, their voices mingling in a haunting symphony. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. The flames died down, the whispers faded, and the lane fell silent. Lydia stood alone in the ruins, the weight of the ordeal pressing heavily on her. The ornate box lay empty at her feet, its symbols now dark and lifeless. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the carvings one last time before tucking it into her bag. The lane felt different as she made her way back to the entrance. The oppressive energy was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. The shadows no longer lingered at the edges of her vision, and the whispers were silent. As she stepped onto the main road, Lydia turned back to look at Ashwood Lane. For the first time, it seemed ordinary. But she knew the truth. The lane's secrets were far from ordinary, and its story was far from over. Back at the inn, Lydia reviewed her recordings and photographs. The footage captured the ritual in vivid detail, the flames and shadows a stark reminder of what she had faced. The audio, however, was silent. No whispers, no voices. Just the crackling of the fire and her own breathing. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. The mystery of Ashwood Lane had been partially unraveled, but new questions lingered. What was the darkness that Margaret Hale had tried to contain? And had Lydia truly set the shadows free, or had she merely shifted their prison? As sleep overtook her, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that her journey with Ashwood Lane was far from over. The lane had let her go, but for how long? The morning light did little to ease Lydia's unease. Though the lane had let her leave, it felt less like a triumph and more like a reprieve. She couldn't escape the feeling that something had followed her back, not physically, but a lingering presence that clung to her thoughts like cobwebs. The inn's walls felt closer, the air heavier, and her reflection in the mirror looked altered, as though her experience had etched itself onto her face. Lydia's recorder sat silent on the desk, its red light blinking steadily. The audio she had reviewed the night before played on a loop in her mind, every pause and crackle as unnerving as the whispers themselves. She needed answers, but the library and Edgar's tomes had given her all they could. If the lane held more secrets, they were buried deeper than she had dared to dig. It wasn't until she noticed the ornate box that the idea struck her. The box was more than an artifact, it was a map. The symbols etched into its surface, the hidden compartment, the way it had resonated with the lane's energy, they were clues. She needed to understand them fully, and for that, she required help. The drive to the neighboring town of Westvale was uneventful, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Lydia's mind. Westvale's historical society was modest but well regarded, a place where local legends were catalogued with scholarly precision. Lydia hoped they might have insight into the symbols on the box. The curator, a bespectacled woman named Eleanor March, greeted her warmly but stiffened when Lydia produced the box. "This," Eleanor murmured, running her fingers over the carvings. "This is old. Older than Greyston, older than the Hales. Where did you find it?" Lydia hesitated. It was tied to a family tragedy on Ashwood Lane. Eleanor's expression darkened. Ashwood Lane? I've heard the stories. If these symbols are tied to that place, you're dealing with something far more dangerous than a family tragedy. She retrieved a thick tome from a nearby shelf, flipping through its pages with practiced ease. These symbols, she explained, are protective. They're meant to contain energy, but not just any energy. They're designed to trap the kind that can't be destroyed. Lydia's stomach turned. Like the shadows on Ashwood Lane? Eleanor nodded gravely. If Margaret Hale used this box in her ritual, she may have succeeded in binding the darkness, but at a cost. Containment is never perfect. Over time, the energy festers, grows stronger. And if the containment fails, it's released, Lydia finished, her voice barely above a whisper. That evening, Lydia returned to Greyston with a renewed sense of urgency. Eleanor's explanation had clarified one thing. The lane's darkness wasn't just a haunting, it was a prison, and the shadows were its inmates. But the question lingered: what had Margaret Hale trapped, and why had it targeted her family? The answer, Lydia suspected, lay not with the lane itself, but with the Hales. She needed to know more about their lives before the fire, the choices that had led Margaret to such desperate measures. Edgar had mentioned personal letters in the library's restricted section, but Lydia had been too focused on the ritual to explore them. Tonight, she would. The library was empty when she arrived, its dim lights casting long shadows over the shelves. Edgar had left the archives unlocked, perhaps anticipating her return. Lydia navigated the rows of dusty tomes and boxes until she found the one labeled Hale Family Correspondence. The letters were brittle, their ink faded but legible. Most were mundane, detailing household matters and correspondence with friends. But one letter, dated weeks before the fire, stood out. It was from Margaret to her sister. Dearest Clara, the shadows grow bolder. Thomas insists we stay, that abandoning the estate would ruin us, but he doesn't hear the voices. He doesn't see them watching the children. I tried the wards the mystic taught me, but they only seem to anger whatever this is. Last night, Emily woke screaming again. She said the shadow man was at her bedside, whispering her name. I don't know how much more we can endure. If the ritual fails, I fear we will pay the ultimate price. Yours in hope and desperation, Margaret. The letter confirmed Lydia's worst fears. Margaret hadn't acted out of ignorance, she had been fully aware of the risks. And she had failed. But why had the shadows targeted the Hales to begin with? What had they done to invoke such wrath? Lydia returned to the lane under the cover of darkness, the ornate box and the Hale letters in her bag. This time, she carried a new tool, a series of charcoal rubbings Eleanor had made of the box's symbols, annotated with translations. If she was going to confront the lane's darkness, she needed to understand its language. The lane greeted her as it always did, with an oppressive silence and a chill that cut through her coat. But tonight, the energy felt different. The whispers began almost immediately, louder and more frantic than before. It knows you. Don't let it out. It's watching. Lydia pressed forward, her flashlight casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt. The ruins of the Hale estate loomed ahead, the charred foundation glowing faintly in the moonlight. As she stepped into the clearing, the whispers fell silent. The air grew heavy, and the shadows coalesced, forming the towering figure she had encountered before. Its ember-like eyes burned with an intensity that made Lydia's knees buckle, but she stood her ground. You came back, the figure growled, its voice a rumble that seemed to shake the ground. Lydia clutched the talisman around her neck. I want to know why. Why the Hales? Why this lane? The figure's form flickered, its features shifting between human and monstrous. They called to me, it said. Margaret's desperation was a beacon. I answered. Lydia's breath caught. You were summoned. Bound, it corrected. Margaret sought protection, but she did not understand what she asked for. Her ritual was flawed. Instead of guarding her family, I consumed them. The shadows around the figure writhed, their anguished faces briefly visible. Lydia's heart ached for them, even as fear clawed at her resolve. And now, she asked, her voice trembling. What do you want? The figure leaned closer, its ember eyes locking onto hers. Release. But know this, freeing me will not save them. Their suffering is eternal, their souls, fuel. Lydia's grip on the talisman tightened. What happens if I let you go? The figure's laughter was a chilling sound. You unleash me upon the world. And the darkness I bring will make this lane's whispers seem like lullabies. The choice before Lydia was impossible. If she freed the figure, she risked unleashing a malevolent force upon the world. But leaving it bound meant condemning the Hale's souls to eternal torment. Her eyes fell on the ornate box, its symbols glowing faintly in the shadows. There had to be another way. She reached into her bag and retrieved Eleanor's annotated rubbings. Holding them up to the light, she searched for anything that might hint at a solution. One phrase stood out: balance the scales. Lydia's mind raced. Balance, the shadows fed the darkness, but what if she could sever that connection? What if the shadows could be freed without releasing their tormentor? She turned to the figure, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around her. I can't release you, she said, but I can release them. The figure roared, its form expanding until it seemed to blot out the moon. You dare defy me? Lydia dropped to her knees, tracing the symbols into the dirt with shaking hands. She chanted the incantation Eleanor had deciphered, her voice growing louder as the shadows closed in. The talisman burned hot against her chest, its energy surging through her as she completed the ritual. The ground beneath her cracked, and a blinding light erupted from the symbols. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into the light. The figure howled, its ember eyes extinguishing as it was dragged back into the darkness. When the light faded, the lane was silent. The oppressive energy was gone, replaced by an almost serene stillness. Lydia collapsed onto the ground, her body trembling with exhaustion. The ornate box lay beside her, its symbols dark and lifeless. She had done it. The shadows were free. But the figure, the darkness Margaret Hale had unleashed, remained bound, its prison reinforced by the ritual. As Lydia stumbled back to the inn, she couldn't shake the feeling that her victory was temporary. The lane's secrets were still dangerous, its darkness still waiting. And she knew, deep down, that her connection to Ashwood Lane was far from severed. For now, though, the whispers were silent. And that was enough. The silence of Ashwood Lane in the days following Lydia's ritual was deafening. For the first time since she had arrived in Greyston, the oppressive whispers had ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness. Yet, even in the absence of sound, Lydia could feel the lane's presence, watching, waiting, biding its time. Her victory over the shadows had been hard-won, but it was incomplete. The darkness still lingered, and she knew her fight was far from over. At the inn, Lydia reviewed the remnants of her encounter. The ornate box, now devoid of its glow, lay open on her desk. Its once vivid symbols were faint, almost as though the lane itself had drained their energy. Next to it was her recorder, silent but ready, and Eleanor's annotated rubbings, their meanings partially deciphered but still cryptic. A sense of foreboding hung over her as she prepared for what was to come. The next morning, Lydia returned to the library, her determination renewed. Edgar greeted her with a mixture of relief and apprehension. I thought, maybe you'd left, he said, his voice low. Not yet, Lydia replied, placing the ornate box on the counter. But I need more information. About Margaret Hale. About the lane. There's something we're missing. Edgar's gaze lingered on the box. You've stirred something, he murmured. I can feel it. Whatever you did, the lane isn't the same. Lydia leaned in, her voice firm. Then help me finish this. There has to be something in the archives. Something we've overlooked. Reluctantly, Edgar led her to the restricted section, where rows of dusty tomes and weathered manuscripts awaited. Lydia dove into the stacks, her fingers brushing over spines that crackled beneath her touch. Hours passed as she pored over journal entries, family records, and fragmented accounts of the lane's history. Finally, she found what she had been searching for. It was a collection of handwritten notes, bound together by frayed twine. The title page read, Accounts of the Binding. Lydia's pulse quickened as she flipped through the pages. The text was dense, filled with archaic language and intricate diagrams. One passage stood out. To bind the darkness is to invite its wrath. The prison must be eternal, for release will bring ruin. Yet balance must be maintained, lest the prison itself become a beacon. The phrase balance must be maintained echoed in her mind. She had seen those words before, in Eleanor's rubbings. But what did they mean? And how could balance be restored without unleashing the darkness? That evening, Lydia returned to the Hale Estate's ruins. The lane was eerily quiet, its energy subdued but still present. As she stepped into the clearing, she felt the familiar weight of the air around her. The charred foundation seemed more intact, its edges defined as though the lane itself was rebuilding it piece by piece. Lydia set up her equipment, her movements deliberate and practiced. She placed the ornate box at the center of the ruins, surrounded by the rubbings and Margaret Hale's letters. Her recorder captured the stillness, the silence almost more unnerving than the whispers had been. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the lane came alive. The air grew colder, and the shadows began to shift at the edges of her vision. Lydia's flashlight flickered, its beam struggling against the encroaching darkness. She gripped the talisman around her neck, its warmth a fragile comfort. The towering figure emerged from the shadows, its ember-like eyes burning with a familiar intensity. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its presence as commanding as ever. "You meddle where you do not belong," it growled, its voice reverberating through the ruins. Lydia stood her ground, her voice steady. "I'm here for answers. You said Margaret summoned you. Why? What did she hope to achieve?" The figure's form flickered, its features shifting between human and monstrous. "She sought protection," it said. "But she did not understand the cost. The shadows, the darkness, they are bound to me. And I to them. We are one." "What are you?" Lydia demanded. The figure's ember eyes locked onto hers. "I am the keeper, the warden of what lies beneath. The Hales called to me, and I answered. But their fear, their desperation, it strengthened the prison, turned it into a beacon. Now, it cannot hold." Lydia's mind raced. The prison, the lane itself, was failing. The shadows weren't just prisoners, they were fragments of something far worse. And the keeper was their jailer, as much a part of the prison as the walls that held them. "If the prison fails," Lydia asked, her voice trembling, "what happens?" The keeper's form loomed larger, its ember eyes glowing brighter. "The darkness will consume all. Your world will burn, as theirs did. Balance must be restored, or the prison will collapse." The phrase repeated in her mind, "Balance must be restored." Lydia turned to the rubbings, searching for a clue. The diagrams depicted a series of symbols encircling the ornate box, their meanings tied to sacrifice and renewal. One symbol, in particular, caught her eye, a circle split in two, one half light, the other dark. Lydia's breath quickened. "The balance, it's you. You and the shadows. You're two halves of the same whole." The keeper's laughter was a low, guttural sound. "Clever mortal. But knowledge alone will not save you. To restore the balance, a price must be paid." "What price?" Lydia demanded, her voice rising. The keeper stepped closer, its form towering over her. "A life for a life. The prison must be sealed anew. And for that, a soul must take its place." The weight of the words crushed Lydia's chest. The shadows had been freed, but their release had destabilized the lane's fragile equilibrium. To restore it, someone had to bind themselves to the prison. Someone had to become the new warden. Lydia's hands trembled as she considered the implications. The lane's whispers, the Hale's suffering, the keeper's warning, it all led to this moment. She had come to uncover the truth, but now the truth demanded a sacrifice. The keeper's ember eyes watched her intently. "Choose, mortal. Will you restore the balance? Or will you let the darkness consume your world?" Lydia's grip tightened on the talisman around her neck. The warmth it radiated felt like a small beacon of hope, a reminder of why she had come. She thought of the Hales, of Margaret's desperate letter, of the lives lost to the lane's darkness. If she walked away now, their suffering would be for nothing. Taking a deep breath, Lydia met the keeper's gaze. "Tell me what I need to do." The keeper's form stilled, its ember eyes narrowing. "You would take their place?" Lydia nodded, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. If it means ending this, yes. The shadows around the keeper writhed, their anguished faces flickering in the darkness. The lane seemed to tremble in response, its energy surging as the keeper raised a shadowy hand. Then prepare yourself, mortal. For once the balance is restored, there is no turning back. The ground beneath Lydia began to glow, the symbols from the rubbings appearing in the dirt. The air grew colder, and the lane's stillness gave way to a rising wind. As the ritual began, Lydia felt the weight of her decision press down on her. She had chosen to face the darkness, to restore the balance. But what awaited her on the other side, she could not know. The wind roared through Ashwood Lane, carrying with it the whispers of countless voices, their tones both mournful and urgent. Lydia stood at the center of the glowing sigils, her body trembling as the ritual unfolded around her. The keeper loomed over her, its ember eyes burning with an intensity that pierced the darkness. "Do you feel it?" the keeper growled, its voice reverberating through the ruins. "The balance is shifting. Your choice will seal your fate." Lydia's grip on the talisman tightened. The warmth it radiated seemed to fight against the chill of the lane, grounding her amidst the chaos. She could feel the energy building, a tide of power that threatened to sweep her away. But she held firm, focusing on the incantation she had memorized from Eleanor's rubbings. By the light and the dark, Lydia began, her voice steady despite the roaring wind. "By the bond that binds and the force that frees, I call upon the balance to seal what was broken and restore what was lost." The sigils beneath her feet flared brighter, their intricate patterns pulsing with energy. The shadows surrounding the keeper writhed, their forms flickering between human and monstrous. Lydia's heart pounded as she continued the chant, her voice rising above the cacophony. "Through sacrifice, the scales shall tip. Through resolve, the prison shall hold. Let the keeper stand eternal, and let the darkness remain bound." The keeper let out a deafening roar, its form towering as the energy of the ritual surged. The shadows around it recoiled, their anguished cries echoing through the lane. Lydia's vision blurred as the power coursed through her, the weight of her decision pressing down like a physical force. "Enough," the keeper bellowed, its ember eyes narrowing. "You cannot withstand the balance alone. Choose your fate, mortal. Bind yourself to the lane or face oblivion." Lydia's mind raced, every fiber of her being screaming against the choice before her. To bind herself to the lane meant becoming part of its darkness, a warden like the keeper, forever trapped in its confines. But to walk away would unleash the shadows upon the world, dooming countless lives. "I won't let this consume me," Lydia whispered, her voice firm despite the fear gripping her heart. "There has to be another way." She reached for the ornate box, its symbols now glowing with renewed intensity. The diagrams Eleanor had deciphered spoke of balance, a harmony between the light and the dark. Lydia's fingers traced the carvings as an idea formed in her mind. "Keeper," she called, her voice cutting through the storm. "If the prison is to hold, it cannot rely on darkness alone. There must be light to temper it. I will not become your replacement, but I will become your counterbalance." The keeper's form flickered, its ember eyes narrowing in suspicion. "You would bind yourself not to the lane, but to the balance itself." Lydia nodded, her resolve solidifying. "If it means keeping the darkness contained, then yes. I will be the light that tempers the dark." The keeper hesitated, the shadows around it shifting uneasily. Finally, it extended a shadowy hand, its fingers crackling with energy. "So be it, mortal. But know this, the balance is not static. It will test you. It will demand of you. And should you falter, the prison will fail." Lydia took a deep breath, her hand trembling as she reached out to meet the keeper's grasp. The moment their hands touched, a surge of energy coursed through her, filling her with both searing pain and an overwhelming sense of clarity. The sigils beneath her feet flared brighter than ever, their light consuming the lane. The shadows let out one final, anguished cry before dissolving into the ground. The wind ceased, and the oppressive chill lifted, replaced by an otherworldly stillness. The keeper's form began to fade, its ember eyes dimming as it spoke one last time. "You have chosen your path, Lydia Bennet. Guard the balance well, for it is all that stands between your world and the abyss." With that, the keeper vanished, leaving Lydia alone in the ruins. The sigils faded, their glow sinking into the earth as the lane returned to its eerie silence. Lydia stumbled back to the inn, her body aching and her mind reeling from the ritual's aftermath. She collapsed onto the bed, the talisman still warm against her chest. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with images of the lane, the shadows, and the keeper's burning eyes. The next morning, she awoke to a strange sensation. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight of the lane's presence diminished. But as she gazed at her reflection in the mirror, she saw something new, a faint, glowing symbol etched onto her palm, the mark of the balance she now bore. Over the following days, Lydia began to understand her new role. The whispers of the lane had returned, but they were different now, softer, less menacing. She could feel the balance within her, a constant push and pull of light and dark. It guided her, grounding her as she navigated the lane's mysteries. Eleanor's rubbings and the ornate box became her tools, artifacts she used to reinforce the lane's boundaries. She documented everything, her notebook filling with observations and theories. But despite her newfound understanding, questions remained. What was the darkness the keeper had guarded? Why had it targeted the Hales? And most importantly, could the balance truly hold? One evening, as Lydia stood at the lane's edge, she felt a familiar presence. The shadows shifted, forming the faint outline of a figure. It wasn't the keeper, but something else, something lighter. "You have taken a great burden," the figure said, its voice soft and melodic. "But you are not alone. The lane's story is far from over." Lydia nodded, a sense of calm washing over her. The lane had changed her, but it hadn't broken her. She was its warden now, its protector, its balance. And as the night fell over Greyston, Lydia knew she had found her purpose, to guard the whispering shadows of Ashwood Lane and ensure their story was never forgotten. The first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains of Lydia's room, illuminating the scattered remnants of her journey, Eleanor's rubbings, her leather-bound notebook filled with frantic notes, and the now quiet recorder. Lydia sat at the desk, her fingers tracing the faint, glowing mark on her palm. It pulsed faintly, a reminder of the pact she had made and the role she had taken as the warden of Ashwood Lane. The world outside seemed unchanged, blissfully unaware of the balance Lydia had restored. Yet, for her, everything felt different. The whispers that once filled her nights had softened into gentle murmurs, less intrusive and more watchful. They weren't seeking harm anymore, they were seeking guidance. Lydia had become their anchor, the balance that kept the lane from collapsing into chaos. Underscore 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 underscore. Greyston itself was slowly returning to its quiet, uneventful existence. The townsfolk, unaware of the danger that had loomed so close, went about their daily routines. But Lydia noticed subtle changes, fewer shivers as people passed the lane, fewer hurried glances over shoulders. The lane, while still foreboding, no longer exuded the same malevolence. Lydia visited the library to speak with Edgar one last time. The old librarian looked at her with a mixture of awe and trepidation as she placed the ornate box on the counter. "It's done," she said simply. Edgar hesitated, his gaze flicking between Lydia and the box. "The lane, it feels different. Calmer. But you seem different too." Lydia offered a faint smile. "I've changed. The lane doesn't control me, but I'm tied to it now. The balance had to be restored, and I'm part of that balance." Edgar nodded slowly, his expression heavy with understanding. "You've done something remarkable, Lydia. But you've also taken on a burden most wouldn't survive. If you ever need help, I know where to find you," she said, her voice soft. She pushed the box toward him. "Keep this safe. It's part of the lane's story, and it might hold answers for the future." underscore 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 underscore. Lydia spent the following weeks piecing together what she had learned. The Hales tragedy had been the catalyst for the Lane's transformation, but the darkness they faced had existed long before them. It was ancient, predating Greyston itself, and the Keeper was merely its jailer. Margaret Hale's desperation had drawn the Keeper to her, but her flawed ritual had destabilized the prison, turning it into a beacon that attracted the shadows. Now, as warden, Lydia's role was not only to maintain the balance but also to uncover the truths buried within the Lane. She spent her days exploring its boundaries, documenting its changes, and searching for clues about the entity the Keeper had contained. The glowing symbol on her palm guided her, pulsing faintly whenever she neared areas of significance. One afternoon, as Lydia ventured deeper into the Lane, she discovered a hidden clearing she had never seen before. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled roots intertwining to form a natural barrier. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, its surface etched with symbols similar to those on the ornate box. Lydia's heart raced as she approached, the mark on her palm glowing brighter. As she traced the carvings on the altar, a vision overtook her. She saw flashes of a time long past, a village plagued by shadows, a group of mystics performing a binding ritual, and the birth of the Lane as a prison. The vision shifted to Margaret Hale, her face etched with fear as she pleaded with the Keeper to save her family. Lydia felt Margaret's desperation, her guilt, and her ultimate sacrifice as the shadows consumed her. When the vision faded, Lydia collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The Lane's history was far more complex than she had imagined. It wasn't just a prison, it was a battlefield, a place where light and dark clashed endlessly. And now, Lydia stood at the center of that battle. The discovery of the altar deepened Lydia's resolve. She began working with Eleanor, who eagerly helped decipher the symbols Lydia had seen in her vision. Together, they pieced together fragments of the Lane's history, uncovering hints of the mystic's original intent. The Lane wasn't meant to last forever, Eleanor explained one evening, poring over a translated manuscript. The mystics created it as a temporary measure, a way to contain the darkness until a permanent solution could be found. But they disappeared before they could finish their work. Lydia frowned, her gaze fixed on the glowing symbol on her palm. So the balance I'm maintaining, it's a stopgap. If I fail, the darkness breaks free. But if I succeed, the Lane remains a prison. There has to be another way. Eleanor nodded. There's always another way. We just have to find it. As the months passed, Lydia grew more attuned to the Lane. The whispers became less chaotic, their voices blending into a single, coherent presence. It was as though the Lane itself was communicating with her, guiding her toward understanding. One night, as she stood at the edge of the Lane, she felt a familiar presence. The shadows shifted, and the faint outline of a figure appeared. It was not the Keeper but a remnant of its power, a fragment left behind to aid her. You've done well, the figure said, its voice a soft echo. But your journey is far from over. The Lane's story is still unfolding, and its secrets are not yet fully revealed. Lydia nodded, her resolve unwavering. I'll keep searching. I'll find the answers the mystics left behind. The figure faded, leaving Lydia alone with the Lane's quiet whispers. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace. The burden she bore was heavy, but it was also hers to carry. The Lane had given her purpose, and she would honor it. Years later, the town of Greyston remained unchanged on the surface. But for those who paid attention, the Lane no longer held the same fear. Stories of disappearances and strange phenomena faded into memory, replaced by rumors of a solitary figure who walked the Lane at night, keeping its secrets and ensuring its balance. Lydia's life became intertwined with the Lane, her existence a testament to the sacrifices made to protect the world from its darkness. And though the Lane's whispers persisted, they were no longer cries of anguish but voices of remembrance, ensuring that the story of Ashwood Lane and the light that tempered its dark would never be forgotten.